The sun began to set on another day, as it had done countless times before, rising and falling all around us. One day, I dreamt I might be allowed to sit under the shade for a short time, as the sun blazes over us. But for now, I must remain working in the fields under the heavy heat, as it is the way of things. My father claims we should take pride in being slaves. We are part of something bigger. We have work, and in return we are granted the liberty of life itself. We work the land, owned by our king, with our bronze plough, owned by our king, and we produce the food that is owned by our king. We barely own our names. I am R, as is my father, and his fathers before him. The faces change, but the function remains. We are the enslaved. My father, behold, look upon our works. We mere men who have laboured for great gains now watch it taken away by those who decide which roads that they take from us, while naught remains but a handful, or half, that barely sustains us alone. My father, wizened and wise, sat me down and told me of our ancestors, their lines, their times. Long ago the lands were chaos, without order, that mankind were never social creatures. They were akin to animals. Then, the incredible few arose and formed a state of things, and these few forged a path ahead over millennia. The first in our longest line bore the name Were, the first civilized people within their cradle of civilization, wisely following the kings of their time. This long lineage lasted for centuries. But while kingdoms and empires around flourished, the nation wherein the line of war lived instead faced inwards and fought amongst themselves, all arguing over their ideal world, and that violent destruction of the way of things tore down their society, and it collapsed. Be grateful, he told me, that our longest line survived, becoming the line of R and wisely following the new kings, those incredible few who granted us life and stability. Returning to our labours under the blistering new sun, working the fields and facing spears and whips for miles around, I cannot help but dream of some slight difference at the very least. The slave driver soldiers sneer at us. The free people ignore us. The king is seldom ever seen. There could be small changes, at least. My father, listen. This eternal torment of a life cannot be for the best. Surely there is some better way. My son, he says as he looks down at me, if there are faults in the way, then it would be common sense for our kings to correct them, would it not? Even if, by some divine happenstance, that you, he told me, perceived a flaw that they simply overlooked, then surely they would come to see it in time. There is no need to collapse the foundation of society to see it amended. There is a natural moral arc of the cosmos that bends towards justice, my son. Trust in the way. The sun sets again, and the next day the grains are fewer, for reasons unknown, while the king seems in passing a little fatter than before. I look to my father. Hark, does this not prove? But he shakes his head. It is just the way of things. Hark, I call as we leave the lands at the end of another countless day, and I see a body in the field, a friend, another enslaved who worked and lay now not far from my father and I. His rags are red, and the mark in his back was unmistakable, the same as the spears that glinted like the sun and hung above their heads for most of the day. We had heard the night before that he had stolen some meat for his family, and now he lay slain before us. My father tottered behind me. Alas, it's a shame. But if he sought to save his life, he ought to have invested in fewer children. He got what he deserved. In horror, I can barely breathe, and I lash out at my aging father for his heinous discretion. But he defends with his words as if reading from scripture that for every one of the incredible few are the hundreds who've followed and lived and the thousands who've turned away and dies. It is the way of things, he told me. He frames it so, but I am grown enough now to see the truth. It was never the kings who granted us life. The kings have etched themselves into histories as if it were they alone who founded their times, and not the work of countless nameless people of mankind. The many who allowed the few to live their divine lives, but the structure of the system resigned them to a little more than a drop in the blood of their descendants. Their stories never truly told. This world is rotten and stained red, built on blood, and my father, the elder, is more than happy to clean their bloodied spear. Hark, I say, some days, or months, or years from the last, to him and to anyone who listens, as the crumbs grow fewer and our population dwindles drastically, as the bronze in which we are brought and sold crumbles under an iron fist, as the sea peoples cripple our king's forces from afar, as we face collapse because we have such an immutable system around us. Is this not the end? My father turns away, as he often does now, believing I am too far gone. I barely speak out loud to him anymore. I speak more to be heard. I do not want to be resigned to history as a hapless fool who perpetuated the way and was unaware of our impending doom. I work on in contempt under the blistering sun. There was little I could do, but a complaint loud enough for the survivors, but soft enough to escape the slave drivers may satisfy my contempt. I will not go silently, but perhaps softly. Spears now pierce the enslaved out in the open, in view of all, and the fear of death was certainly an incentive for silence. But I was still heard by the many around, and nothings turned to nods, and nods turned into closed fists. The grains are fewer every day. In many days there's naught to be found at all. While the lines around us are cut short by famine, yet the crops we produce have never been so plentiful, and the soldiers seem a little less slim. We cannot sustain. There's enough for us all, but not in the way that things are now. Waiting for change is not an option. We are coming to the brink of extinction. We cannot sustain. My father feels the change, as if the air around us has been growing heavy and hot. He comes to me and addresses me as his son, the younger. But I tell him there is only one R, and it is neither me nor my own child. He stands alone with that slave name. He told me, your soul sight will lead us astray. A slave's selfish greed for freedom will collapse our way of society. The food may be less than enough, but it is better than none at all, and that may be the future if we risk the way like this. I turn away. When the way does wrong, it's just in its nature. But if someone tries to be better, That is some great perversion of the natural order of things. He acts as if the present state of things has been etched into history, unmalleable and eternal, ordained by the gods. To shatter their will, according to him, will destroy the world. If this is the best the world can be, then it's not worth saving. The king comes to bless us for a new year as the sun sets on the eve of this year. A ritual that kept many going with the hope the gods would save them. But the truth has begun to set in, and the gods would never come to save us. We sat on our hands and knees as he waddles his way towards us, gracing us with the smell of his miniature meal. A small reward for himself for walking so far, but a mighty feast in our eyes. I feel the handle under the dirt beneath my hand. Even as it fades over the horizon, the sun burns heavy from above, and the shade is still mere feet away. Torches were lit for the ritual, and the king stood with it in his hand. He who chose were time charged, for he held the light and decided which path it shined upon. My father sits to my side, and I feel his gaze upon me. I look ahead at the great slave farms that made up most of the land around the city. Most around were enslaved peoples serving this one cruel man who stands before us. The man beside me, R, would do anything for the king before us, but the king would never do the same. My father and his fathers before him helped to build this world. I look upon his works and I despair. These two cruel men deserve each other. R finds privilege in the fact he will die and no longer suffer this world, and he dares not disturb his final days by risking it all. However, he dooms his son and his grandson to the long fate of enslavement, and for that, he is unforgivable. I think of my son and the hardship ahead if he lives in this world, and I cannot bear the thought of this life for him. He will not suffer the life of R. He is of my line. I am Coodbe, the first face of a better world. My hand digs into the dirt and holds tight. A hoe fashioned into a mighty weapon. With the rise of my fist, I become the slayer of kings. I write history. The reign ends here. The world is turned upside down as the no longer enslaved peoples rise up and take down slave drivers. We fought for our lives, for the lives of our family, for the lives of everyone in this new world. I fight because I was born into this world, and I will die in this world, and I will do whatever I can to better this world. I take the flame from the corpse snuffed out light and I shine it bright down a path of a better way. R still sits, now alone, as the free people follow me into the city. The road ahead is long. I think as we walk, torch in one hand and my bloody blade in the other. The fight is still ahead. Tonight, we decide the way of things, and we bend the arc of the universe towards justice, because to survive is natural, and to struggle is human, but to fight, divine.